This is part 22, final summary. This is the last part of my presentation series on word magic. I decided not to spell the word magic as Crowley did, because in the big picture sense of our ultimate existence, I don't see any difference at the end of the day between stage magic and anything else, right? Crowley wanted to distinguish his dedicated practice to magic. He wanted to distinguish that from the popular culture or mainstream perception of magic, which is more of a casual or entertainment sort of magic, right? But after all, we presumably, at least from what I can tell and what we understand about the world, we presumably occupy and interact within the same reality, right? And in that same reality, there are the very devoted adepts of occult study. There are practitioners of all sorts of magical forms, and there are stage magicians and everyone in between. So we all share this reality together, right? And this reality is completely and fully comprised of magic in that sense, right? So in that sense, there's no separation. There's no distinction in a larger sense. I understand Crowley's distinction, right? But at the same time, there is a shared reality, and the very essence of our being is magical, no matter if you're doing stage magic or if you're doing some sort of very serious or sincere esoteric study. Our understanding of religion, magic, and many Western esoteric traditions, as well as the archetype of the hero, comes to us from the Indus Valley and the civilizations which existed in this region thousands of years before the formation of Greco-Roman civilization. This isn't to say that other cultures haven't contributed greatly to our world, because they most certainly have. Nor does this series account for the new discoveries which are still being made in respect to the roots of our culture, right? It's quite a vast story, and I'm only bringing one part of that history to this presentation. Western culture is an amalgam or a collection of much older religious, magical, and esoteric practices coming mainly from the East. It has succeeded in transcending its ancient Eastern roots while including, at the same time, the foundational occulted elements which serve as the framework upon which our modern civilization was built. Even though the institutions of modern-day government, education, and the sciences appear to transcend the mysticism and magic of yesterday, right? They will always include these basic components which await the wisdom seeker to rediscover them. As hard as they try, the sciences, for example, will never escape the paradoxical and magical nature of our reality. Just as the students of religious and esoteric orders graduate upward or radiate outward in degree, so follow the secular, academic, and governmental systems of modernity. The reconciliation of the great mystery of existence from which subjective practices of mysticism, magic, and religion are founded upon, and the objective scientific understanding of our world, the outer world of forms, are a unity of opposites from which the seeker may leverage both of these in his or her quest for peace, happiness, and the prosperity of the soul. When we look at the roots of our ancient religion, it is easy to understand why such universal ideas spread across cultures and throughout landscapes. Conversely, we know why the narrative in the West has appeared to shift so radically when compared to our own cultural origins. A few parts ago, I talked about the Tower of Babel. We had a whole section about the Tower of Babel. And identity is important to the human species as it represents our deep desire to belong. And this Tower of Babel explains or teaches us that identity to a group can scale only to a certain degree before, or a certain size, before it crumbles underneath its own weight. And that is because human beings can only manage a certain number of relationships, can only manage a certain number of meaningful interactions or meaningful relationships with people, right? Such as like Dunbar's number, which is right around 150 or so, depending on who you talk to. So to scale one entire faith, one religion across the world, or one government across the world, one language across the entire world, with all of these people, it simply is not sustainable. And the teaching of the Tower of Babel is a recognition of this human capability and this human instinct, and it's a very wise and thoughtful understanding of humans and what it means to be part of a group identity and have meaningful relationships within that group, right? Which explains perfectly why we have different cultures, different religions, right? They seem to scale to a certain point and then they break off and another group starts and another group starts, right? And that has everything to do with human nature, okay? So this group identity is very important, and we have to have this group identity for each other, but also to the universe at large. It's a way that we connect with each other, we connect with ourselves, and we connect with the larger world, right? So that feeling that existence is somehow a fluke or a gradual accident infers that our divine nature and our deep connection to the universe is somehow irrelevant to our reality, right? However, it is modern science which ironically is proving on a continual basis that the very essence of all things in this world is actually metaphysical. Only form, not material, has been proven to exist in our world. So in a very real sense, this world is the spiritual realm. Now, there may be many levels of this spiritual realm, and this is something in many mystical teachings, many esoteric teachings talk about the levels of the spiritual levels of existence. And this may be just one spiritual level of existence among many. So once we understand there truly is no difference between magic, religion, and the fundamental processes of our world, the underlying design of our world is fundamentally magical. The notion that religion should somehow be at odds with this process, this natural process, or we can call it magic or nature, whatever you want to call it, right? This idea that religion should be at odds with any kind of mystical interpretations or the operative theology that that is to say, the practice of one's own divinity or one's own spiritual practice, right? The idea that these should be somehow at odds with each other becomes a preposterous assertion. The essence of the very words we speak today contain the original intention and energetic power from which the name givers of these words, of these languages, of so long ago left for us to rediscover. There's something embedded in our language even today that has a very strong link to this universal wisdom that we as seekers are trying to access, right, and share. Culture is very much the operating system of the mind. How you think and view the world is directly influenced by what your culture has come to understand about the world and how it has come to its understanding, right? And this also goes for how we view science and religion. A certain level of cultural conditioning is going to be inescapable, and it serves an important role in helping us navigate our reality and to communicate with some degrees of certainty. It's important to know which elements of culture are worth keeping and honoring and which should be discarded. Seeing the world through fresh eyes, moment to moment, is to recognize the very magical nature, the transformational nature of our reality. Not magic in the sense of superstition, but magic in the sense of awareness, right? Of this tuning in to what is and what is happening with yourself and what you are, right? Everything in the world undergoes a transformational process in its appearance and eventual disappearance, right? Things come into this world, they're here for a time, they slowly erode, then they disappear, right? One day the earth, the sun, and the moon, all of us, will no longer exist. We'll be gone. Poof. And yet here we are, having popped into reality to bear witness to this for a short time. Like some sort of now you see it, now you don't bit of stage magic, right? Science and mysticism are branches of the same fundamental human need to understand our world. One gains an inner understanding in the objective sense and the explicit sense, right? This is science. While the other method gains understanding in the realm of the implicit and the subjective, right? This would be mysticism or occult study. However, the implicit is primary and the explicit is secondary, right? You cannot know the explicit, you cannot know the world of forms out there better than you know the inner dimensions, right? Better than you could access your inner resources, right? So that is where you need to start. A wise and advanced civilization is open to exploring our inner and outer worlds by both of these main methods in order to learn as much as we can about this strange and wonderful world we inhabit. The structure of our reality is more than ever dependent upon words and concepts, which are often mistaken for the reality itself. We must recognize this is happening and take time to honor the mystery of the real world, which exists without language or human thought. The world, such as it is, or such as it really is, remains the true source of all magic. Just like the human brain appears to have distinct parts in objective reality, the mind consists of its own distinct aspects in the metaphysical. The belief that our minds are merely a byproduct of the electrochemical processes of the brain are unwittingly placing an emphasis on the outward dimensions and fail to account for the distinct inner dimensions of subjective reality that were mapped out by mystics and seekers many thousands of years ago. The Hermetic principle of mentalism is operating in all things in the universe at varying levels. This principle is a recognition of the inherent metaphysical nature of our entire reality, as it is governed by levels of mentalism and awareness. To understand the difference between the magi and the sorcerer is to recognize the delicate balance or preservation between simultaneous creation and destruction, and to observe and honor these operations that are happening within yourself. The nuanced understandings of the difference between good and evil is to ultimately realize they are on opposite sides of the very same spectrum. This isn't to say that evil should be embraced like a lover, but it should be understood that your shadow is your lover. The seeker understands that creation and preservation are to be celebrated, but does not attach him or herself to expectations or outcomes. Instead, the seeker recognizes the destructive forces inherent in the universe and the destructive forces inherent in him or herself, and knows that without this, there is no creation, there is no existence. In addition to Aristotle, Plato, and Galileo, the men shown here represent the who's who of some of the greatest minds in Western civilization, or at least in the consensus view of Western civilization itself. The genius of each of these men comes from their deep understanding and subsequent marriage of the inner dimensions of the self and the outer dimensions of their perceived reality. The unity of opposites, or the high level of alchemical self-knowledge within the greatest minds in Western history, whether achieved consciously or unconsciously, is without a doubt present as a key ingredient to their success and subsequent notoriety. Everything in our world comes from Shiva and returns to Shiva. Shiva means that which is not. Shiva is this emptiness, eternalness, timelessness. Everything is contained within it, right? So everything comes from this eternal emptiness and will always return to this. Such is the magical operation of creation, preservation, and destruction. Since Shiva is your very essence, and there is no escape from this, the path revealed to the seeker is to immerse into this reality in such a way that you discover that holding on to anything in order to stay safe offers no safety. You have come out of this void. You will come back into this void, right? You have come into this timeless eternity, right? And you will be in this timeless eternity forever. Instead, the true you is coming into contact with all that is and ever was in a universal sense. Allowing the elusive, or this imago, right? The imago is this image of who you think you are, this false image of self. So allowing this imago version of the self to disappear, right? Allow it to burn away, allow it to die, right? Brings the seeker into true confidence beyond the world of images, beyond this false imago of the self and the false imago of your reality, right? It brings you into a true knowing, a true understanding, beyond this world of this virtual world that we live in, of images in the mind, of mental images, and into alignment with what really is, right? So you're just accessing what is. And the old self, or the self that you imagine yourself to be, right? Your ahamkara is then seen for what it really is, which is just a reflection, just an image. So there comes a time when the seeker no longer needs to outsource their self-interest. And this is accomplished by improving the quality of one's attention. Discovering and ultimately residing in your very own divine light and shadow means that you have begun to find your own voice. So to reside in your divine light, I think we know what this means, to find your higher self, but also to reside in your shadow when you have moments where the shadow side comes out, right? To also reside there, to go into that, right? Just as much as you would go into your divine light, but not to split yourself, not to fragment yourself and say, well, that's not me, right? Well, none of those are really you, but go into those moments, right? Ironically, your own voice, when discovered, will guide you. And when I say your own voice, these are your internal, this is the watcher, these are the internal resources, right? This is your divine spark, right? This will guide you further than you ever thought possible, in directions you never would have imagined. So if you think about a spark objectively, you have this spark and it comes in, and spark is a small thing, right? But what if you actually were to go into that spark instead of being outside of it and looking at it? If you were inside of that spark, it would seem like a flame to you. It would seem like a very intense light, right? So you want to cultivate those inner resources. You want to cultivate the watcher within, not this idea of the self, but the real. Get closer to the real essence of who you are, right? Not who you think yourself to be, right? And if you do this, you most certainly will not recognize your old self anymore, nor should you. The key is to access your own inner resources by eliminating distractions, connecting with nature, learning to think for yourself, and making your own decisions from the authentic place of your own heart mind. As you realize that you are able to decouple the manufactured reality of words and language and concepts from the actual reality, from reality as it is, as it truly exists, right? You can begin to see and use words in a completely new way. So this entire word magic presentation has not been about throwing off the conventions of language and thought and rejecting them completely and going some other new direction. Oh, I've got something new here, right? This information is about as old as storytelling is, for example, right? So it's not about throwing off these conventions. It's about using them appropriately. It's about using them when the time comes to use them, and then when there's no longer a time to use them, put them up, put them away. You don't need them, right? To rely on the mental chatter to use this intellect 24/7, to use the intellect in every moment that you're awake, for example, is to misuse your resources, right? So instead, you want to use your intellect when appropriate, right? Use your intuition when appropriate. So this new way is going to be completely your own, and it represents your unique voice. These are your inner resources. This is your unconscious. This is your intuition, right? And you're going to form your own understanding. This understanding, this connection that you make inside of yourself is not transferable. This understanding is not transferable in a complete 100% one-to-one basis, right? You can transfer some of your understanding as knowledge, but it's one of those things like you had to have been there. You won't fully understand it unless someone gets to inhabit your own being, right? So therefore, this understanding is not transferable to others, but there's a paradox here, because it is a universal sense that we all share, right? To access one's own internal dimensions is always, in the course of humanity, has always been the teachings. It's been the teachings of Christ. It's been the teachings of so many teachers and so many prophets, or whatever you want to call them, throughout human history, right? This has always been, you could say, the first step, right? But this understanding is really yours alone. And yet, paradoxically, it is a universal sense that we all share. Nobody takes quite the same path that you take in your life. And you cannot know anything in this world better or more completely than yourself. So start there, right? That's what all of these teachings of antiquity, the esoteric teachings, are really about. No one can discover quite the same hidden treasures and lost knowledge that you will find in yourself. It is up to you to bring these gifts into the world, as well as finding your allies, guides, and mentors on your hero's journey. This is the end of part 22 and the end of this series. Thanks so much for watching, and if you made it all the way through to the end, because these presentations can be kind of, I know my presentation style isn't quite compatible, to say the least, with the YouTube culture in general. But this, of course, this series is not your typical, I guess, YouTube video to begin with. So I can't adjust or change who I am just to fit a desire to have a certain amount of attention, because, of course, these videos are for a very specific audience, and this audience, of course, is growing, and I want to thank you for that. But we can example the improvements in our lives to others, and this is exactly how we can bring more and more people around us online to accessing our inner resources and going within ourselves and really taking a look at what's going on in here first, right? And that's the starting point for all of us. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.